What if vengeance came not in the form of fury, but in the shape of tenderness? What if a single kiss, whispered upon pale skin, carried not love but the weight of death itself? In the hush of Alabama, 1854, shadows lengthened across the red earth, and within those shadows stirred a tale both chilling and poetic, a tale of a woman named Isadora. The plantation lay wide and sprawling, its fields stretching endlessly under the bruised sky. Cotton bloomed in rows like ghosts rising from the soil, and every stalk seemed heavy with the silence of those who bent their backs beneath the sun. The big house stood proud, built of pale wood, its pillars scarred by years of storms, its windows shuttered like watchful eyes that never blinked. Behind it, narrow cabins hunched low, lined in uneven rows, their smoke curling faintly from crumbling chimneys. It was there, in one of those cabins, that Isadora dwelled. She was no ordinary figure, though her presence to the careless eye appeared unremarkable. A woman of quiet grace, her hands bore the calluses of labor, yet her face carried a composure that seemed carved from stone. Her eyes were dark, solemn pools, and in them lived a fire carefully hidden, as though an ember that refused to die. Her hair was pulled back in a simple knot, her garments plain and frayed, but when she moved, there was a stillness in her step, as if she belonged neither wholly to this earth nor to the fate it had pressed upon her. The mistress of the house, Evelyn Harrow, was a woman of refinement and severity. Pale-skinned, thin-lipped, draped always in silks that rustled like whispers of disdain, she walked the halls of the plantation as though it were her kingdom and all within it, her subjects. To the men and women forced beneath her hand, Evelyn was a shadow of cruelty, a woman who hid her sharpness behind southern charm, a smile dipped in honey yet steeped in venom. And between Isadora and Evelyn, a strange current flowed. For though mistress and slave could not stand as equals, their lives tangled in ways unseen. Evelyn called for Isadora often, not for field labor, but for the intimate duties of the household. To sew gowns, to brush silks, to lace corsets, to pour tea. And sometimes, late at night, to sit quietly in her chamber, when the mistress's nerves trembled with some unseen unrest. The household whispered of it. That the mistress was peculiar in her choice. That she found in Isadora not just a servant, but something more, an unsettling mirror perhaps of strength wrapped in silence. Where Evelyn ruled with voice, Isadora commanded with stillness. Where Evelyn brandished wealth, Isadora bore dignity no lash could strip. In those long hours, Evelyn would speak and Isadora would listen, her expression unreadable. The words that passed between them were often one-sided, but there were moments when their gazes met, fleeting, charged with something unspoken. A strange intimacy, woven not of affection but of power, dependence, and dread. The year was heavy with unease. Rumors swept across the south of uprisings, of poisonings, of fires set in the dark. Tales of vengeance carried like smoke from plantation to plantation. Overseers muttered, masters tightened their grip, and yet beneath the weight of fear, the enslaved carried their secrets quietly. Isadora carried one such secret. By day she worked, hands folding linens, polishing silver, smoothing the fabric of Evelyn's gowns. The air inside the big house was thick with the scent of lavender and lye soap, yet beneath it lingered another odor, the iron tang of discontent, the musk of unspoken rage. By night, Isadora returned to her cabin, where the walls breathed with the sighs of the weary. There, by dim candlelight, she would sit, silent, her hands clasped, her eyes staring into flame as though conversing with it. She did not speak of what she thought in those moments. None knew. But something gathered in her, quietly, like a storm on the horizon. It was a December night when the first shadow fell. The air was brittle, sharp with cold, the stars hidden behind veils of mist. Evelyn had taken ill, or so she claimed. Her throat ached, her breath trembled, her hands shook as she clutched her lace handkerchief. The house was restless. Doctors were summoned. Remedies poured into goblets, their scents sharp with herbs. But it was Isadora who stood nearest her bed, who held the glass to her lips, who wiped the fevered sweat from her brow. And as Evelyn lay trembling, her pale eyes fluttering open, She reached for Isadora's hand, not with affection but with command, with need. For in that moment, mistress and slave were bound together not by chains of iron, but by a thread of something darker. Pendency, fear, and perhaps, though neither dared to name it, recognition. Yet in that grasp there was something else, a foreshadowing. For the kiss of death does not arrive with warning, and Isadora's silence was itself an omen. The house did not yet know it, but the air had shifted. Shadows thickened in the corners, the fire crackled with strange urgency, and in the stillness of Evelyn's chamber, history held its breath. For within that silence, within the quiet presence of Isadora, the seeds of an ending had already been sown. The sickness of Evelyn Harrow spread like a shadow across the halls of the big house. At first it was dismissed as weariness, a chill caught in the winter air, a weakness of the body too accustomed to luxury. But as days turned to weeks, her condition worsened. Her lips paled, her voice grew frail, and the once commanding figure seemed to dissolve into the silken sheets of her bed. The household grew restless. Whispers crawled through corridors and across the slave quarters like smoke curling under doors. The mistress, proud Evelyn, had been unshakable, untouchable, feared. Now she lay trembling, her bones sharp beneath her skin, her eyes haunted with fever. The overseer muttered that it was illness. The doctor claimed her blood was tainted with melancholy humors. Evelyn herself hissed through chattering teeth that she had been cursed. And at the center of it all, like a still shadow in the corner of the room, was Isadora. She poured the water, prepared the wine, folded the handkerchiefs dampened with herbs. She sat at the bedside, silent, her presence both a comfort and an omen. The other servants exchanged glances when she passed, their voices lowered, their eyes wary. For though she did nothing beyond her duties, it was as though the sickness itself followed her footsteps. Rumors spread. She lingers too long at the mistress's side, some murmured. It is in her hands, others whispered. Perhaps it is in her breath. The big house, once filled with laughter of visiting neighbors and the rustle of gowns across polished floors, now stood hushed. Curtains were drawn, mirrors veiled, and the air grew stagnant with unease. In the evenings, when the wind howled through the cypress trees, servants claimed to hear strange sounds, the weeping of a woman, the low humming of Isadora's voice as she moved through Evelyn's chamber. But no one dared question her openly. For Evelyn, in her frailty, still called for her. "Isadora," she rasped, clutching the edge of the sheets with trembling fingers. "Do not leave me." It was a strange bond, mistress clinging to the very presence that unnerved the household. Some claimed it was desperation, others swore it was enchantment. Evelyn's eyes, hollow and pale, followed Isadora like a tether, as though in that silence there lay a terrible solace. One evening, as the fire crackled low, a visitor came. A neighboring mistress, veiled and perfumed, her words dripping with false sympathy. She sat by Evelyn's bed, fanning herself delicately, whispering of remedies, of prayers, of faith. But her eyes strayed again and again to Isadora, who stood at the foot of the bed, her face impassive, her gaze steady. Later in the hallway, the visitor spoke to the master of the house in tones sharp and urgent. "Do you not see? It is not illness. It is her. That woman. The one you allow so near. Shadows cling to her like smoke." The master, weary and troubled, dismissed the accusation, but unease gnawed at him. He began to watch Isadora more closely, the way her hands moved, precise and deliberate, the way her eyes never faltered when others questioned her. The slaves in the quarters spoke too, though their voices were hushed, careful. Some claimed Isadora bore a gift or a curse, that she carried within her the old knowledge, passed down like whispered prayers, that she could summon silence itself and weave it into vengeance. And through it all, Evelyn withered. Her body weakened, her breath grew shallow, yet her grip upon Isadora's hand only tightened. It was on a cold night, with the moon veiled in mist, that suspicion reached its height. Evelyn had grown restless, her fever wild, her words incoherent. She called out names no one recognized, wept for sins long buried, begged for absolution from ghosts unseen. The household gathered at her door, fear writ across their faces, listening to the madness within. And when the doctor entered, he found Isadora seated at her side, stroking her damp hair, whispering softly into her ear. The sight chilled him. He swore later that the words were not prayer but something else, something darker. A lullaby meant not to comfort but to lead her deeper into the shadows. The doctor warned the master. "Remove her. That woman brings death into this chamber." But Evelyn, pale and trembling, clutched at her arm with surprising strength. "No," she gasped, her voice like wind rattling through dry leaves. "Isadora stays." The household could not understand it. Why would Evelyn cling so fiercely to the one whispered to be her undoing? Why would she invite her near when even the air seemed to grow colder in her presence? The days passed, each more suffocating than the last. Doors creaked, candles guttered, and the big house seemed to sink into its own decay. The slaves whispered by the hearth, the overseer drank heavily, and even the master walked with shadows beneath his eyes. Everywhere suspicion swirled. Some claimed to see Isadora slip into the mistress's chamber after midnight, carrying nothing but silence. Others swore they saw her lips brush against Evelyn's brow, her whispers curling like smoke. And then always the sound of Evelyn's ragged breath, the soft rustle of sheets, the faint cry that pierced the halls before silence fell again. By the end of January it was clear, the mistress of the house was dying. Her body wasted, her soul tethered by threads thin as cobweb. And still by her side, unmoving, was Isadora. The household avoided her gaze, speaking in murmurs when she passed. Children shrank behind their mothers, men turned their heads. Yet none dared touch her. For though she bore no weapon, no chain, her silence was armor enough. And so the whispers grew louder, that when Evelyn's death came, it would not be natural. That when the final breath left her lips, it would not be to sickness but to the kiss of Isadora, her silent shadow, her patient deliverer. The question was no longer if, but when. The winter of 1854 deepened. Frost clung to the window panes, and the oaks outside stood skeletal against a bruised sky. Within the suffocating chambers of the big house, Evelyn Harrow's strength dwindled to the faintest of threads. Each breath was a battle, each heartbeat a reluctant echo. The household lived on edge. The servants carried trays with trembling hands, careful not to linger in the corridors. The master walked with dark circles beneath his eyes, as though haunted by visions he could not confess. And always, like a sentinel carved of shadow, Isadora remained by the mistress's side. By then, the rumors had become certainty in whispered tongues. Evelyn would not live, yet none dared predict how. On the evening of February 2nd, a storm rolled in. Thunder cracked across the heavens, and rain lashed the roof with furious hands. Candles sputtered in their holders, and the house seemed to groan beneath the weight of the wind. It was then that Evelyn called for her. Her voice was weak, shredded by nights of fever, but it carried through the silence of the chamber. "Isadora!" The girl stepped forward, her face calm, her movements deliberate. She carried a basin of cool water, a cloth folded neatly, her presence steady against the storm's chaos. The mistress's hand reached for hers, fingers skeletal, trembling with desperate need. "Closer," Evelyn whispered, her breath rattling. "Do not leave me now." The doctor and the master lingered near the doorway, their faces grim. Yet Evelyn's command was law, and they dared not intrude. Isadora sat on the edge of the bed. Her hand brushed across Evelyn's damp brow, her touch soft but unyielding. The mistress's eyes fluttered open, and for a fleeting moment, clarity returned. "You have been with me," she breathed, her voice a fragile thread. "When all others feared, when they turned their backs, you remained." Isadora said nothing. Only her gaze, dark and fathomless, answered. "Stay," Evelyn begged, tears streaking her hollow cheeks. "Stay until the end." The storm raged. The house shook. Time itself seemed to pause. And then it happened. Isadora leaned forward, her movements slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic. Her lips touched Evelyn's, not with passion nor tenderness, but with finality. It was a kiss not of love, but of release. A sealing of fate. A silent vow carried into the abyss. The mistress shuddered once. Her breath hitched, caught, and then stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the storm outside seemed to hold its breath. The doctor rushed forward, fumbling for a pulse, his hands trembling. The master staggered closer, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. But it was too late. Evelyn Harrow was gone. And at her side, still as stone, sat Isadora. Her lips pressed once more to the mistress's cold forehead before she rose, her face unreadable. The room erupted into chaos. The doctor declared her passing, the master cursed the heavens, servants wept in muffled tones. But all eyes, even through grief and fear, turned to Isadora. They had seen it. A kiss. 4 days afterward, the household buzzed with whispers. Some claimed it was an act of mercy, a farewell between servant and mistress bound by strange loyalty. Others swore it was witchcraft, that Isadora had stolen her final breath, that she carried death in her very touch. The truth did not matter. Legends rarely require truth. The master, hollowed by grief and suspicion, could not bring himself to punish her. Perhaps he feared Evelyn's dying wish, that Isadora remain. Perhaps he feared what she might be. So she was left untouched, unshackled, to move through the house as she always had. But her silence was heavier now, her presence more haunting. Children crossed themselves when she passed. Servants avoided her shadow. The quarters spoke of her name only in whispers, fearing that the very air might carry it back to her. And then one dawn she was gone. Her pallet in the quarters lay empty. Her few belongings had vanished. No one saw her leave, no horse was taken, no trail followed. It was as though the storm itself had carried her away. Some claimed she walked into the woods and never returned. Others swore she took to the river, her spirit drifting like mist across its waters. A few whispered that she still walked the earth, moving from place to place, carrying death's kiss to those who deserved it. The mistress was buried in the family plot, beneath stone carved with scripture. But it was Isadora's name, unspoken, that lingered in the air. Years later, travelers spoke of her in hushed tones. They told of a dark figure glimpsed at crossroads, of women who died with lips pale as frost, of masters who whispered a name before their final breath. And in Alabama, when storms rolled across the hills, some swore they could still hear the sound of Evelyn's voice, calling for the shadow who never left her side. The story of Isadora did not die with the mistress. It lived on, twisted into legend, sharpened into warning, carried in the mouths of those who feared silence more than screams. For she was not merely a servant. She was not merely a girl. She was the kiss of death itself. And Alabama never forgot her name.